Hey there, guys. Ephraim's Vanguard here, and I'm going to give my thoughts on the Netflix Death Note movie. I just finished watching it, so it's still fresh on my mind, and I don't have any notes here or anything, so this is just going to be kind of off the cuff. Uh, Obviously, I'm going to be spoiling the movie here. I'm also going to be spoiling the Death Note anime TV show, whatever. So watch that if you haven't. It's on Netflix as well. The TV show is in North America at least, and it's available both in sub and in dub. So whichever style you prefer, you can have that. Personally, I would recommend dub. I've seen both kinds, but personally, I would recommend dub just because it's a very well handled English dub. Plus, Bratz Whale needs more love. But the point still stands. You should probably watch that before. You should probably watch those before I go into spoiling this. Mainly because don't get spoiled on genuine Death Note. It's very good. But before I start this, I should specify that I did go into this movie. Like I said, I've seen Death Note before the TV show. I need to specify that. I've seen the Death Note TV show before, and I like it a lot. It's straight up one of my favorite TV shows out there. And it's been one of my favorites since I saw it, and it still is to this day. I love it to death. That said, it is the only Death Note related thing I've seen. I haven't read the manga. I haven't seen any of the live action Japanese movies. So basically all I've seen related to Death Note is the anime and the Netflix movie. And I'm not going to summarize the anime. I'll just mention whatever's relevant when it comes up in relation to the movie. But the point of me saying that was to keep in mind that I am going into it with that perspective. Now, with that said, I wasn't expecting this movie to be good in the first place at all. In fact, I was kind of dreading an American adaptation of Death Note because anime adaptations, I haven't seen any, but supposedly they've been very rough. And I wasn't expecting much different from this one. First off, I'll just start by addressing it as a movie all on its own. I thought it was okay. I thought the plot was kind of engaging, but not really. And I thought the movie moved way too fast. It could have used a few moments to breathe. But overall, I thought it was okay. Like, I gave it 3 out of 5 stars on Netflix. For perspective's sake, I gave the Castlevania anime adaptation, I gave that 4 stars. So, just giving you my perspective on that. Of course, y'all don't know my perspective on that series, but whatever. Now, most people are comparing the Netflix movie as it is as an adaptation to the Death Note series, being the manga or the anime, really, because they're very similar. They don't deviate. The anime doesn't deviate much from the manga at all, from what I hear. And that is what most people know, either the manga or the anime. So that's kind of the standard that this is based on, or was being judged upon. And that's what I'm going to be spending. Obviously, you can probably tell from the time most of this review talking about this being the Netflix movie in comparison to the original anime. And it's not a good adaptation at all. For one main reason, Death Note is a very character-driven show, or character-driven series, I should say. And the interaction between characters and their personalities, all that, it's very important. And the movie just kind of completely took apart those characters as an adaptation. Now, I'm going to sound really harsh on this movie. Like I said, I thought it was okay. 3 out of 5 stars. I think it would have been much better if the movie was like a what if, where you dropped the Death Note in America instead of an Americanized adaptation of the Netflix storyline. It would have, like, if they handled the movie if they handled the movie in a way like the Superman Red Sun comics handled a what if of Superman landing in the Soviet Union with the same basic, with the same basic framework, but just deviating from the source material more in a substantial way. I'm not making myself too clear here. The point is, they shouldn't have been tied to a character named Light with the Kira concept. They shouldn't have been tied to L or Misa or Light's dad. I can't remember his name, and that's really embarrassing. But I think they just should have ditched most of that and have just started fresh with their own characters, whatever they wanted. And like obviously they're not the same characters. They are adapted for an American audience, and most of them have been significantly changed. My case still stands. I think that would have worked better, but instead they adapted the original Japanese source material into this. And like I said, the characters weren't too good. So let's start with our main character, Light Turner. For the record, some people have issues just with them turning all these Japanese characters into white people. I'm not going to give my thoughts on that. Some people also have thoughts about L being black, but that I am going to get into later. Because that, like I said, later. But Light's character, it is a mess. Since this is an adaptation, I expected Light Turner to be very similar to Light Yagami. I could not have been more mistaken with my assumption. They are almost polar opposite characters. Because the thing with Light Yagami was that he was, for mostly, really except for his intelligence, he was a pretty average dude. He was average looking. He wasn't a loser at school. He wasn't like depressed about his life or anything. He wasn't upset at anything. He was just a completely normal guy until the Death Note dropped out of the sky. I didn't mean to rhyme there. And really, that's the whole point of it, is that Light ends up with a god complex of sorts, thinking, I don't want to cast my own opinions, my own views on Light's stuff, but he ends up with a god complex of sort, and it's supposed to hammer home that someone with that much power, it could happen to anybody. And the point of Light being so normal was to hammer home that it could happen to anybody with that sort of power. Because like I said, Light was just a normal high school kid. He wasn't a loner. He had plenty of friends. He had a girlfriend in some ways. Not the most normal ways, but whatever. He had a loving family. The point is, he was completely normal. And in this adaptation, he was not normal. For starters, his Light in the TV show, he didn't have really a vendetta against criminals for any reason. Light in the movie, of course, his mom was killed by a criminal, and that's his main impetus for killing right off the bat. And so that was just kind of a weird change. Plus, Light in general, throughout the thing, he's just kind of like a typical moody teenager, just one with given the power to kill whatever. And I'm not really explaining this all too well. The point is, he felt like a teenager handling the Death Note instead of just a normal person, if that makes any sense. Like Yagami was a high schooler, but really, it could have been anybody. It could have been just a dude going on his way to work. Whatever. Yet the characterization of Light Turner, I feel, it was just it was too specific to him, and he was just kind of like a moody high schooler that seemed like a loner with no friends, and he was angry at the world for reasons. And so he wanted to take that out with some sort of violence. Speaking of violence, that's another thing I didn't really like about the movie, the overemphasis on blood and gore, especially with like the first couple kills. Um, for a show about Death Note was surprisingly tame with most of the stuff. It was very PG-13 at worst. In fact, the two bloodiest deaths were Light's dad and Light himself. Everything else was very tame. But this movie loved to go over the top with all this stuff. And in fact, if you remember from the TV show, Kira kills mostly with heart attacks. That's like his signature thing. Of course, he can kill with other ways, but he uses the heart attacks as his sort of signature. And you only get one heart attack, and it's part of a montage in the movie. It's not that big a deal, but I feel like they could have just been more subtle with it instead of having to be all blood and gore and all that kind of stuff. Another issue with Light's character, he was just really like if we were to put this in terms of crime, Light Yagami, he would be doing a bunch of premeditated crime because he always thought through his actions before he did them. He thought of the consequences, what would happen, and what he just thought in his head what the best course of action would be. In fact, that's like half of the episodes of the show is just his interior monologue in his mind. Either that or him just saying it to Ryuk. But in the TV show, not the TV show, in the Netflix movie, almost every action Light did was based on passion. Like what would be called a crime of passion. It was completely instinctive, no thought put into it, completely off the cuff. And that detracts a lot from Light's character, because the whole reason he could stand up to L for so long in the show was because he was so calculating. Light always thought 2 or 3 steps ahead, and that's how he avoided trouble for so long. And Light being so impulsive in the movie it just made him seem like a complete and utter idiot. And while it's on my mind, if I have anything else to say about Light's character, I'll shift back to him. But now I'll shift over to Misa, or Mia, as she is in the show. But I'm just going to call her Misa for the sake of it. I wasn't too concerned with how they were going to adapt her character, because Misa's really not that important of a character in the show. But for some reason in this movie, she had a much more integral role. For starters, she was working with Light from the beginning to form the identity of Kira, which is just really odd, because in the show, her entire personality is based around being in love with Kira. Just the concept of Kira, it's himself and that embodiment. So it was kind of weird to put her in a central role like that. I mean, I know she does use the Death Note plenty in the show, but the point of her character is that she loves Kira and she will do anything because of that. She straight up says that she's willing to be a pawn in Light's game no matter what. And that's what Light uses her as for, a pawn. And in fact, their entire relationship in the show is supposed to be like a Joker Harley Quinn sort of thing, except oddly consensual 100%. And Misa knows what's going on, but she's still okay with it. But that's craziness for you. The point being that Light, at least while he still has his memories at Kira, you can argue otherwise once he loses his memories in the Yotsuba arc, but the point of him starting that relationship in the first place was so that he could use Misa to further his goals as Kira, and it was not genuine at all. In the movie, for some reason they decided to make Misa and Light have genuine love for each other from the very beginning, and it was very awkward and weird, and it just didn't make a whole lot of sense, and it rubbed me the wrong way. Also, Misa having such a heavy role in combining and, making the decisions as Kira, again, that's another thing that detracted from Light. him just seeming more dumb, not as smart. Because in the show, Light makes all the shot. He calls all the shots. What he wants to do, that's what happens. Well, unless he doesn't predict them, but that's besides the point. Yet in the show, everything he does seems to be, well, almost everything. In the movie, that is. In the movie, almost everything he does has to be, is an agreement between him and Misa. And it just detracts from that whole experience of Light being really smart and on top of things and being able to stand one-on-one against L. So those two characters, Misa and Light, I thought really were not well handled. They really just deviated from the characters of the show. Another one that deviated quite a bit from the show was Ryuk himself. Now, I don't have too much to say here. It's mainly just one point. In the show, Ryuk was just sort of like an apathetic dude who dropped the Death Note, implied at least, to have dropped the Death Note in the human world just to see what would happen, basically for kicks and giggles. And he does giggle a lot, that he does. But he doesn't care what happened. He says straight up from the beginning that he doesn't care what happens to Light. He just wants to see how this would pan out, and he doesn't interfere at all. He basically, like I said, he just wants to see it pan out for his own entertainment. And he's very apathetic about the whole thing. I mean, in the background of most of the scenes, while Light's just talking to him, he's just like laying on Light's bed, reading a magazine or eating an apple or whatever, and just making snide quips at Light. And that's part of the reason why people like Ryuk so much in the show, because he's supposed to be like this evil demonic creature, but he just doesn't give a crap. In this movie, however, he was very clearly supposed to be like a demonic force of evil or chaos or whatever right from the get-go, with the whole incident in the detention room and the science lab and everything like that. Not to mention he prods Light into doing the first kill. And he even just straight up kills for Light a bit later in the movie. Threatens to kill Light if something happens. Basically, Ryuk has a very hands-on approach in the movie, which was just very unbefitting of the character to me. Because in the TV show, he's supposed to be, incredibly passive. He's walking behind Light all the time and laughing just to see what comes down. The scene that comes to my mind when I think about that is when, I think it's episode 9, when Light outsmarts Naomi Misora, and she gives him her real identity, and Ryuk's just standing in the background laughing his head off because he knows what just happened. But he doesn't say a thing to Light throughout that whole time. He doesn't really... No, he's not laughing then. He does, but he also laughs earlier in that episode when Naomi gives him the fake ID and Light thinks he's won, and then she doesn't die. And Ryuk also laughs his head off then, just because it's all a game to him and it's fun to see. But like in the movie, Ryuk doesn't so much see it as fun. He's just trying to kill people or have people die, which is just... It's just such a deviation away from that character. But that's really all I have to say about Ryuk. One character that was mostly the same was Light's dad. Of course, it's a very basic character. A cop that seeks justice and truth. It's not that ordinary a thing. I've always thought Light's dad in the TV show was like pretty much the same as Commissioner Gordon from Batman, and that really was kind of the same here. Just, a good guy out there for truth and justice, not injustice. And not much to say there. And now we get to the final main character in this, that being L. Now, with as much as I've complained about the deviation of the other characters so far, you think I would also complain about L. For the most part, actually, I thought they handled him surprisingly well. Well, there's also Watari, but we'll get to him. Really, the only major gripe I have with L is that, like Light, he didn't think ahead too much, and like that mental dynamic between Light and L is such an integral part of the show from episode 2 on. Well, until episode 25. That's what keeps you watching. Is that dynamic. It's that game of cat and mouse. And you're just seeing that game of chess, which you're just trying to figure out who's going to... How's Light going to counter L's attack here? How did he think this through? And that's just what keeps you going. You find out Light thought 5 steps ahead, and then you find out L thought 6 steps ahead. And there's really not that much foresight for L in this movie. For starters, he walks around all the time in public with his face barely covered, and he's obviously very visible with his processions, going on live TV himself. And just things like that. He makes himself very visible, which isn't like L on the show. He also hangs out at the police department and identifies himself as L, whereas he had the Kira task force come to him in the show and like basically live with him, which was weird. But aside from that, he also just didn't think his plans through as fully, like with Watari. Watari's actual name being Watari was very odd, and I can't believe they just went with that. It was so dumb. But the point is, like L in the show, he wouldn't have just... Watari was a code name for the dude's actual name that I can't remember. But that was the point. It was a code name, not his actual name. So when someone found out his actual name and face, then he couldn't be killed. And also in the show, L sets up all these elaborate traps with bait and such to lure Kira out and find out if Light is truly Kira, because he has his suspicions, but like everything before the Yotsuba arc is him trying to confirm that suspicion. And in fact, the whole point of the Yotsuba arc is that Light throws off his suspicion, and that's how Light bests him. But in this series, it's like he straight up says from the get-go that he knows Light is Kira. Then why doesn't he just do anything about it there? He says it's because he wants checkmate, but like what's the point? And later he even issues a search warrant on Lighthouse, just saying from a legal perspective, if you can convince a magistrate judge to issue a search warrant on someone's house, even though you really have no evidence of a crime, then odds are you also have enough evidence, or enough probable cause, that is. Probable cause, is that it? Yeah, probable cause. Probable cause enough to have that same magistrate issue an arrest warrant, which he could have just done for Light right then. Or, told the officers. And, like, L just didn't think things through. Another big example was, in the anime, when you realize that the duel between Light and L is going to be such an intense mind game of tricks and planning ahead and wits and that kind of stuff, you realize that in the second episode when L goes on live TV, announces his name, and Kira thinks he's got him, and he kills someone and instead L tricks Light, or I should specify tricks Kira, and Kira kills that person on TV who was on death row. And because of that, that's how he reveals, that's how L finds out that all Light needs is a name and a face. And in doing that, L doesn't put himself in danger. They kind of do the same thing in the movie, but instead L puts his actual body and soul in harm's way in doing so. in the process, and it's just like he doesn't think that through. What if he was wrong with that assumption? He just would have died right there. And like in the TV show, he takes that precaution and has it be a death row inmate, not him. So just in case that he's wrong, he doesn't die for it. And yeah, I said earlier that some people have issue with L being black. I don't. I don't think it's necessary for L to be black either, but I don't think it ruins his character or anything. Because the importance of L, like I don't know if I made this clear earlier or not, but the importance of L is his intellect and his personality. And aside from those few complaints of thinking ahead that I had about his intellect earlier, they really did capture L well. Like all his quirks and mannerisms and all that stuff. They captured really well in this movie. Now, I know one part that people probably don't like is L getting all emotional towards the end over Watari's death. Oh, real quick, let me just throw this in. Watari, aside from the name, his actual name being Watari, and L sending him out there with no other form of protection, even though he knows all Kira needs is a face and a name, being stupid. Aside from that, just being idiotic. Man, what was I saying? Something about what? Oh yeah. Well, aside from that incident with Watari's name, I thought that character I thought it did translate pretty well into the movie. Aside from him being controlled during death, but I'll get into that with a general criticism that I have, which I'll come back to once I'm done talking about L. Now, about L, with his emotional reaction towards Watari's death, you would think I would kind of say the same thing I did earlier about Light being emotional, but the difference is L was calm and calculating throughout most of the movie, whereas Light was not calm and calculating for a single bit during this, and Light's just an emotional wimp throughout all of this. You see in the anime, both Light and L, they always kept their calm even in intense situations. Well, most of the time, I should say. Most of the time they kept their calm, and they and they always thought things through. They weren't hot-headed. It was very rare for either of them to go off the cuff suddenly and get all emotional. And L, like, almost never did in the show. And, like, I complained about them deviating that for Light. For L getting emotional over Watari's death, I can kind of understand that. Perhaps not to the degree that the Netflix movie wanted to paint it. But I could see him wanting to take revenge on Light for that, and like shouting in anger, rushing in at Light. I could see him doing that if he truly knew that Kira was Light, and he just wanted the justice to be done right there. Pretty much only if it was Watari that was killed. Of course, technically, L does find out that Watari gets killed on the show. But it happens literally seconds before L's own death, so we don't get to see his reaction to that all too much. One final thing that I forgot to mention earlier, I think it's really dumb that the Death Note has a bunch of new rules that were just randomly added for the convenience of this plot. Like, that whole 42-day thing is like... I know the Death Note does have some rules in the anime, but I think at most there's like 13 from what I remember. 13 rules. They just had like a bunch of random ones here that made no sense, and they were completely thrown in for the convenience of the plot. Like basically everything in the final bit with Misa and Light and all that. But like I was saying, it was a very poor adaptation. Really, the only good part was L. That was the only character I felt was faithfully translated over into this show. That and Watari and Light's dad. But it really doesn't help that because the show it really wanted to focus on Light and Misa, and Light and Misa in this weren't likable characters at all. They were both just pricks. Oh, real quick, while it's also on my mind, the anime series, I took a few points to show that there was this dichotomy between L side and light side that it would make you question which one was truly just, which one was actually justice. Because both of them made fair points. Both of them, it doesn't specifically say that either one was right or one was wrong. I mean, after all, both Light and L end up dead in the end. So, there's that. But the point is, the Netflix series, it really made you question... No, not the Netflix series. The anime. It really made you question that about who had the truly right idea of justice, L or Light. In fact, you'll see people arguing online all the time about which one was right. L, Light, Kira, Justice, whatever. And, of course, they did that in universe, too, with the Kira followers in the Netflix movie. But they just really didn't paint that in reality. They kind of acted like... Well, no, they were very explicit in that Light went over his bounds, and that he regretted doing so, which is not what the real Light did up into his very death. But like that, they made it very clear that in the Netflix show that Light was in the wrong with what he did. I mean, there's many people, in talking in terms of the anime, they agree with Light's ideal, they just don't agree with the means. And the Netflix show, they say both means and ideal are wrong. And so much so that, like I said, they even have Light end up regretting it at the end. And that's just another qualm I have with this. They took away that theme from the show, which was a major thing. But like I've been saying, very poor adaptation. Just generally bad characters. Very poorly translated characters. And they took away what... And losing the characters in particular the conflict between Light and L, that mental game of cat and mouse, they really just took away what made the show so special, what kept you on the edge of your seat so much, wanting you to watch the next episode. And I can't say I was surprised. Like, this is honestly what I was kind of expecting. But, you know, the Netflix anime... I keep on messing this up. The regular anime, it still exists. It's still good. I watched it multiple times. It's still good. So, I guess I'm not going to be, like, personally offended by this, that the Netflix series exists and they ruin the characters. Like I said, it's just an adaptation. It's no big deal. Now, if Netflix does remove the original Death Note series, then I'll have a qualm. But, for all, that's all I have to say off the top of my head. If there's any other thoughts, I'll post them in the comments down below. If you have your thoughts, please give them in the comments down below. Until then, thank you guys for listening to this. I know I've been rambling absent-mindedly a lot. That's because it's like 10:30 at night. Thank you guys so much. And, again, thank you for watching. And I don't know when the next time I'll do a TV or movie review. I'll just whenever, I guess. Alright, see you guys next time.